Part 1. He mounted like a rocket, curved over in splendid parabola, dived down through cumulus of pigeons. One bird fell back, gashed, dead, looking astonished, like a man falling out of a tree. The ground came up and crushed it. From the Peregrine by J.A. Baker. Chapter 1. 7 months before. Nate Romanowski was thigh-high in the icy water of North Piney Creek under the craggy profile of the snow-covered Wyoming Range. He was there to kill a man named Axel Soledad, whom he'd pursued in a state of unhinged fury for months. Soledad had left a trail of death and destruction behind him in his hunger for revenge against Nate and Joe Pickett. The cost had been catastrophic. Live. The blood, the body. Nate blamed himself for his wife's death. He blamed Axel Soledad more. It was mid-April and the ice was finally breaking up. Large, 3-inch thick platters of it bobbed along the surface, carried by the current. As he crossed the creek, he kept one eye upriver so he could spot the largest chunks floating his way and dodge them, lest they knock him off balance. Even though he wore a pair of waders that he'd purchased at a fly-fishing shop in Pinedale, a small town with a welcome sign that announced that it was all the civilization you need. The water was so cold that his legs had gone numb, and he could barely feel his feet. The water in the free stone river was so clear he could see the rounded maroon and beige river rocks between his boots. Nate was tall, blond, and rangy. His eyes were icy blue and piercing, and they peered out from a high-altitude, wind-burned face with high cheekbones and a hatchet-like nose. He wore his long hair tied back in a ponytail with a leather falcon's jess. Under his parka was the weight of a Freedom Arms .454 Cazul handgun loaded with 5 rounds. Half a box of spare cartridges was in his parka pocket. He doubted he'd need them. 5 rounds meant 5 dead bodies, and from what he'd learned, there were only 4 people at his destination. At over 7,000 feet in the mountains, it was still winter. Crusty snow clogged the pine tree-lined banks, and the first green shoots emerging from the snowpack were at least a month away. It was 22 degrees Fahrenheit, and every breath he exhaled was in the form of a condensation cloud. The night before, Nate had learned through a barroom conversation in Big Piney that a man matching Soledad's description had been holed up in a bizarre rental property on the west bank of Piney Creek. The property belonged to a marina owner from the Ozarks who was a Wild West aficionado. The Missourian had purchased a one-time line shack on a small private holding and transformed it into a mini frontier village with a 2-story lodge, false front outbuildings, and a serve-yourself saloon. People would go crazy for it, the owner had announced. The locals in Big Piney and Pinedale had been less impressed. The property was so isolated that very few tourists ever booked it, and those who did were lucky to find it. It sounded like the perfect place for Soledad. Soledad had shown up in the town of Big Piney a week ago with 3 others, Nate had learned. 2 men in their mid-30s and a woman who appeared to be Soledad's girlfriend. They'd arrived in an older model Honda Civic with Colorado plates.